Hello, and welcome to my conference talk for the Symposium. My name is Rohaan Sanyal. I'm 14 years old and I live in the Bay Area. Today, I'll be presenting a CS conference talk on how we can predict the happiness of a nation and what factors determine the overall morale of a country. Here's a quote that I'd like to start with. The world is good at quantifying nearly all the events and transactions in our lives, from when we are born to everything we make and buy to how and when we die. What the world is not good at is quantifying how we feel and how we experience life, even though how we feel affects all the other measures. John Clifton, CEO of Gallup. Here's a table of contents for what I will be going over during this presentation. I'll be starting with a core question, then moving on to an introduction, explaining the methodology we use to answer the question, displaying the results, interpreting the results, and then ending with a conclusion and how we can use this data to create a better and happier world. We'll start with our question. Given the basic factors of a country, how can we predict what score it will receive on the World Happiness Index? This is our thesis question. Keep this in mind as we move throughout the rest of the presentation. Going more in depth about the question, what is defined as a basic factor? For us, a basic factor is a data-driven statistic of a country that can be surveyed and analyzed. Some examples are GDP, life expectancy, and mental health statistics. But we also consider the less obvious factors, such as military spending, agriculture, and BMI/obesity. Here's an introduction to the World Happiness Report. The World Happiness Report is a global attempt moderated by a team of experts to rank and score every country based on the happiness of their citizens, released yearly. The most recent report is World Happiness Report 2022, which focused on the years of 2019 to 2021, which are especially major in the fields of happiness due to the global pandemic and subsequent lockdown that many of us were struck by. The next release is scheduled on March 20th at 12 p.m. ET this Monday for those watching. The website is worldhappiness.report. The World Happiness Index is a full list of each country recognized by the UN, each ranked by their happiness scores. Here's a few excerpts of 2021's World Happiness Index. Finland was first on 2022's World Happiness Index. For a large majority of years with the World Happiness Report, Nordic countries have consistently topped the charts. Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Iceland, Finland, Switzerland, and the Netherlands have been the happiest countries for many years. Afghanistan was the lowest ranked country on 2022's World Happiness Rankings. Countries that are involved in wars and have unstable governments and economies are usually lower in the happiness rankings, such as Afghanistan, Lebanon, and Zimbabwe. Scoring system. The scoring system of the World Happiness Report is based on data from worldwide polls to each country. Finland got a score of 7.821 in 2022, while Afghanistan received a score of 2.404. The World Happiness Rankings are also explained by 6 base factors. The first was GDP per capita in terms of purchasing power parity adjusted to 2017 constant international dollars. The World Happiness Report uses data from the World Bank from 2019 and 2020, as well as forecasts for 2021. And the second factor is life expectancy, constructed from data collected during the World Health Organization Global Health Observatory Data Repository, which has life expectancy data available for select years, including 2010, 2015, and 2019. Interpolation and extrapolation were used to calculate the rest of the data. The third was social support. It was found by asking the binary question, if you were in trouble, do you have relatives or friends you can count on to help you whenever you need them or not, during the Gallup World Poll, GWP, and calculating the national average. The fourth factor was generosity. It was found by regressing the national averages of GWP responses to the question, have you donated money to a charity in the past month on log GDP per capita? The fifth factor was the citizens' perceptions of corruption in their country. The World Happiness Report averaged the binary answers to questions about whether corruption is widespread throughout the government and the businesses in the country. The sixth factor was freedom to make life choices. The answer to the question, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with your freedom to choose what you want to do with your life, was nationally averaged off of the binary collected by the GWP. However, these are not the only factors that impact the score. Dystopia is a constant that the 2022 World Happiness Report calculated by the world's lowest national averages for the 6 factors from the range of 2019 to 2021. It is aptly named as a hypothetical country that serves as a base for the scores. In 2022, the constant was 1.83. This 1.83 was automatically added to each country score as a base. Now we'll move on to the methodology. I use Python and a few prevalent libraries within Python to accomplish my goals. Mainly, I use scikit-learn or sklearn, a library that is used to create regressions, a technique which can predict a continuous variable based on multiple regressors or factors. I also use pandas, which is a simple data storage/collection system, as well as matplotlib/seaborn to visualize my data. For anyone wanting to learn more about data science with Python, I would highly suggest looking at the sklearn documentation and some guides along with it. Data science with Python can accomplish a lot of different things, and this is just a small segment of what it can do. So a quick regressor review. A regression is a statistical technique that relates a dependent variable to one or more independent variables. Here's an example of a linear regressor which finds the best line to fit the given points. Other regressors will use different techniques to create potentially different looking lines. 4 and 5, results and interpretation. Here are a few of the most important factors that we tested. The graph depicts the factors' influence on a country's happiness score. So first we start with GDP per capita. GDP per capita had the greatest impact on a country's happiness score. Close after that was family, which is just the averages of the question, do you have friends or family that you can rely on in tough times? Next was life expectancy, freedom, government corruption, and generosity. This is a graph, this is continued each factor on the overall happiness score. HIV/AIDS had actually a positive impact on the country's happiness score. What a positive impact means is that when the factor is higher, the country's happiness score is generally higher. And you can see that some of these factors are negative. When it has a negative impact, when the factor is higher, it has most of the country's happiness scores are lower. So we can see, although it is very small, HIV/AIDS actually has a positive influence on the overall happiness score. And this could be explained by the fact that HIV and AIDS has it depends on culture, government influence, and sometimes religion. So a lot of developed countries with arguably more freedom will have the problem with HIV and AIDS, while some other countries might not. Military spending was also given a negative impact on a country's overall score. And as a side note, since this data was scaled and changed in order to implement regressions, the actual raw numbers will be different, which may cause some exaggerated numbers such as these. This is a graph showing the happiness score against the GDP per capita. As you can see, there's a clear correlation between a higher GDP per capita and a higher happiness score. This graph portrays happiness against the perceived corruption in a country as well as the freedom. The two outliers you see over here are Rwanda and Qatar. Rwanda may have been inaccurately surveyed, or potentially the reasoning for such a low happiness score while given such a high trust could be due to other reasons that may not involve the trust. Here's a graph with the happiness score, the military spending, and the status of the country. As you can see, there's a correlation between a higher happiness score and a higher military spending. And this outlier that you see all the way up here is the US, which has an infamously high amount of military spending. And sorry, you can find all of these graphs at tiny.cc/symposium graphs, and hopefully I'll add some more as I continue working on this project. So now we'll move on to the conclusion. So back to our question, what factors should policymakers consider when thinking about the happiness of their citizens? The best answer, in my opinion, is that policymakers should think about creating a culture around happiness and security. Family, perceptions of freedom, and perceptions of corruption were some of the most important factors. Countries such as Japan and the Nordic countries have cultures centered around health, security, and happiness, and often they have higher life expectancies and higher happiness scores. Obviously, there's some unchangeable factors such as GDP per capita, which can be changed, but that's a much bigger endeavor than trying to just create a culture around happiness and security. For example, a great example of the culture that Nordic countries have created is gun laws. The US obviously has a few issues concerning gun laws and the usage of guns in our country, while Sweden has even less gun laws than the US, yet it has far, far fewer deaths caused by guns yearly and overall. And that's partly because of the culture that Sweden has created about nonviolence, that people don't have the same problems that might cause gun deaths in the US. So here's as a side experiment, I wanted to ask ChatGPT what it thought about the results that I found. And obviously, this is a big chunk of text. Feel free to pause the video or take a screenshot or do whatever you need to in order to read this if you'd like to. But it had a lot of insights about what factors are the most important. For example, it noticed that the economy, the family, and the health or life expectancy have the most significant positive impact. And it also talked about how individuals can use the information to make choices that contribute to their own happiness. For example, they might choose to focus on building stronger relationships with their families, prioritizing their health and well-being, and pursuing financial stability. And yeah, as ChatGPT is going to cause a lot of differences to how we look and interpret data in the years coming, I just wanted to look at what ChatGPT had to say about this. So here are some future ideas that I might want to implement for my project. I want to include some data from previous years, maybe like a 50 to 25-year time span. And doing this, we could notice the impact of global and domestic events on happiness. For example, wars, changes in government, and things like our global pandemic that we had could have major or minor impacts on the country's happiness. And I think it'd be pretty interesting to look at how that would work. I'd also like to implement new regressors. Instead of just using a basic linear regressor, I think it would be great to try to use elastic net regressors and other regressors that might have a more accurate portrayal of the different factors that we used. I would also like to include more factors. Obviously, we had a limited pool of factors that we could have pulled from, but I think it's always good to have a few more perspectives to look at and a few more insights to find. Thank you for watching my presentation. Unfortunately, since I'm asynchronous, I won't be able to physically take questions, but please feel free to email me at rohansanyal@gmail.com. So that's all for my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And before you move on, remember, don't worry, be happy. Thank you.